Roman Abramovich is often introduced to the public as a billionaire, a man who once owned one of the world's most famous football clubs, and a figure whose wealth seems almost untouchable. But what most people never pause to ask is how such power is constructed, and more importantly, how it is maintained. Wealth on its own is never the whole story. Behind every empire lies a network of hidden connections, backroom deals, and unspoken agreements that shape the way influence flows across the globe. Abramovich is no exception. In fact, he is one of the clearest examples of how secrecy and power are braided together, creating a facade of success while hiding the machinery that makes it possible. The secretive world of Abramovich is not simply about financial transactions. It is about access to corridors of political authority, access to strategic industries, access to individuals who operate beyond the reach of ordinary accountability. He did not just emerge from nowhere with billions in his pocket. His fortune grew in an environment where connections mattered more than talent, where loyalty was often valued above truth, and where silence was rewarded with opportunity. He mastered the art of moving in the shadows, knowing when to step forward into the light, and when to disappear completely. There is a psychological depth to this kind of existence. Imagine living a life where trust is a luxury and transparency is a liability. For Abramovich, relationships have always been transactional, measured not in sentiment, but in utility. Every partnership serves a purpose. Every ally becomes a stepping stone, and every rival a potential bargaining chip. This is the kind of mindset that does not simply pursue wealth, but defends it as a fortress, ensuring that power remains insulated from scrutiny. It is a way of thinking that thrives in secrecy because secrecy itself becomes the currency of survival. Yet what makes this story more than the tale of one man's fortune is how it mirrors the broader truth of global power. Abramovich represents a class of individuals who operate as intermediaries between governments, corporations, and when we speak of the deal that changed everything, it is tempting to imagine a dramatic moment sealed with a handshake in some dimly lit room. But the truth is far more subtle, far more layered. Abramovich's deal was not just about money. It was about influence. It was an arrangement that quietly shifted power, drawing lines that few could see, but all would eventually feel. In the world of billionaires and political titans, deals of this nature are rarely written down in plain words. They are built on silence, on winks and nods, on the unspoken understanding that both sides will gain. But the real cost will be borne by those who are never even told the deal exists. At its core, this was a pact of survival. For Abramovich, it secured protection, a shield that allowed him to move freely through a volatile landscape where fortunes can be erased as quickly as they are made. For those on the other side, the deal provided access to resources, connections, and wealth that could be used to fuel ambitions far beyond business. These were not simply contracts of trade. They were contracts of power, binding men together in a way that blurred the lines between ally and accomplice. And when such contracts are made in the shadows, the consequences are always hidden until they erupt into the open. What made this particular deal so consequential was not just its scale, but its secrecy. To the public, it was invisible. To insiders, it was undeniable. Imagine a chessboard where the pieces appear fixed, but in truth, the rules of the game have been altered without anyone noticing. That is what Abramovich orchestrated. He tilted the board, ensuring that his position remained unassailable, while others unknowingly played a game they could never win. The psychology of such maneuvering is fascinating. Deals like these are never driven by necessity alone. They are driven by a hunger for permanence. Power, once tasted, is never easily surrendered. And for men like Abramovich, permanence is not achieved through transparency, but through entanglement. By weaving others into his web, politicians, financiers, even rivals, he ensured that exposing him would mean exposing themselves. In this way, secrecy became not just protection but leverage. But here is the paradox. The very deal that granted him strength also sowed the seeds of conflict. Because when secrets are shared, they are never truly safe. Those who once benefited may one day feel betrayed, or excluded, or simply envious of the power they helped build but could not control. And that is when revelations emerge, when anger boils over, when someone like Trump, who believed himself central to the arrangement, discovers that the game was never really his to command. This is why the story matters beyond the individuals involved. It reminds us that hidden arrangements, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually surface. The truth has a way of leaking through the cracks, and when it does, it destabilizes not only the men who made the deal, but the very structures that allowed it to exist. We are reminded that silence can protect, but it can also imprison. And those who place their faith in shadows inevitably find themselves hunted by the very darkness they once controlled. The deal that changed everything was not merely a financial transaction. It was a revelation of how power works in the world we live in. It teaches us that nothing concealed remains concealed forever. And when the hidden is brought into the light, it forces us all to confront an uncomfortable truth. The game has always been rigged, but it is only rigged until we refuse to play by its rules. Trump's explosive reaction to the revelation of Abramovich's secret deal was not just a burst of anger. It was something deeper, more primal. The moment when the facade cracked and raw emotions spilled out. For a man who thrives on control, on projecting dominance and confidence, to lose composure so publicly reveals more than frustration. It reveals fear, and fear, in the world of politics and power, is the ultimate admission of vulnerability. To understand why he reacted this way, we must look beyond the surface of the outburst. Trump's life and career have been defined by the performance of strength. Every deal, every speech, every headline has been carefully crafted to reinforce the image of a man who cannot be broken, who commands loyalty, who always wins. Yet beneath that performance lies a truth that he has worked tirelessly to conceal. Strength built on perception is fragile. And when perception is threatened, when secrets begin to surface, the edifice trembles. Abramovich's deal represented precisely that threat. For Trump, it was not merely a financial betrayal or a shift in alliances. It was a direct challenge to his identity as the ultimate dealmaker. If someone else had outmaneuvered him, if someone else had secured influence through channels he could not control, then his own myth was at risk of unraveling. This is why the reaction was so visceral. Anger was the mask. The real emotion was the terror of being exposed, of losing the one thing he values above all, the illusion of invincibility. Psychologically, this is the oldest story of power. Leaders who build their authority on charisma and image are often the most brittle when those images are punctured. They cannot admit weakness because their entire base of support depends on the appearance of strength. So instead of facing the truth, they lash out. They accuse, they deflect, they scream louder, hoping that volume will substitute for substance. But the louder the rage, the clearer the insecurity becomes. And that was Trump's dilemma. Every word he shouted revealed more about his fear than about Abramovich, his betrayal. There is also a philosophical dimension here. When a man like Trump loses it, we are forced to ask, what does it mean to lose control when control itself was always an illusion? Power is never absolute. It is always conditional, always subject to the shifting loyalties and silent agreements of others. Trump's rage was not just personal. It was symbolic of the fragility of every empire built on ego rather than principle. When the foundation is pride, it only takes one revelation, one betrayal, to send cracks racing through the walls. And yet, there is something profoundly human in this moment. We may look at Trump and Abramovich as distant figures in a global chess game, but their struggle mirrors a truth we all recognize: the fear of being undermined, the fear of being seen as less than what we claim to be. It is the universal struggle between image and reality, between how we want to be perceived and what we truly are when the masks come off. Trump's explosive reaction, then, was not simply a tantrum. It was a warning. A warning that when power is hoarded in secrecy, when influence is built on performance rather than substance, the collapse will not be graceful. It will be violent, messy, and undeniable. His rage is a lesson for us all. The stronger the mask, the more devastating the shatter when it falls. And that is the reflection we must carry forward. Do not be deceived by the performance of strength, whether in leaders, institutions, or even in ourselves. What matters is the substance beneath, the integrity that holds steady when secrets are revealed. For in the end, truth has a way of breaking through, and when it does, only what is real will endure. The web of power and deception that men like Abramovich spin is not made of grand speeches or visible authority. It is woven quietly, thread by thread, through layers of silence, favors, and carefully concealed agreements. To the outside world, it looks like fortune, like success earned through talent and vision. But beneath the surface lies a machinery that thrives in the shadows. This is where true influence is forged, not in open competition, but in secret corridors where accountability has no reach. Abramovich is not unique in this regard, though his story is one of the most striking. He embodies a pattern we have seen throughout history: the rise of individuals who know that the greatest power is not the power you display, but the power you hide. A public empire is always vulnerable because it can be attacked, challenged, or dismantled. A hidden empire, however, operates without limits. Its levers are unseen, its reach underestimated, its influence often felt long before it is recognized. That is why deception is not just a tactic in this world. It is the very fabric of survival. Consider how these hidden webs operate. Wealth is fragmented and scattered across offshore accounts, layered through shell companies and disguised behind proxies. Deals are brokered through third parties, ensuring that no single thread ever reveals the entire design. The result is an intricate structure where truth becomes almost impossible to trace, and that is by design. Because in a world where everything is hidden, power becomes untouchable. You cannot fight what you cannot see, and you cannot expose what you cannot prove. Yet deception does not only protect, it ensnares. Those who are drawn into this web often find themselves trapped by their own complicity. A politician who accepts funding from these channels cannot later disown the source without risking his own downfall. A businessman who partners in these ventures cannot walk away without exposing the deals that once enriched him. And so, secrecy becomes a form of control. It binds people together not through loyalty or principle, but through shared silence, through the knowledge that betraying one thread will unravel them all. The psychology of such entanglement is fascinating. People tell themselves they are in control, that they are benefiting from the arrangement, that they can step out when they choose. But the deeper they go, the less freedom they have. The web is not only external, it creeps into the mind, convincing those within it that exposure is death, that silence is safety. And so, they defend the very system that enslaves them, all the while believing they are free. But deception always carries a price. The longer a lie is sustained, the more energy is required to uphold it. And in time, the weight of hidden truths grows unbearable. A single leak, a single betrayal, a single man losing his temper, as Trump did, can tear through years of careful concealment. That is the paradox of deception. It feels strong, yet it is always fragile, for when light enters, shadows cannot resist. This is why the web of power and deception matters far beyond Abramovich or Trump. It is a reflection of how systems of corruption endure, not through open domination, but through quiet complicity, through the willingness of many to look away so long as they benefit. And that should force us to ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. How often do we, too, protect deception in smaller ways, choosing silence over truth because it feels safer? The answer is not found in outrage alone, but in vigilance. If deception thrives in darkness, then the simple act of demanding transparency, of refusing to accept secrecy as normal, becomes revolutionary. For in the end, every web unravels when enough people decide they will no longer be caught in its threads. And that is the power each of us holds, the power to insist on truth, even when deception seems unshakable. When two men like Trump and Abramovich collide, it is never just about money or business. It is about ego, about identity, about the insatiable hunger to dominate a stage where only one can stand at the center. The clash between them was inevitable, not because they despised each other, but because both were driven by the same impulse, to bend the world around their will. And when two forces with such ambition intersect, harmony is fleeting. Self-interest has no patience for partnership. Trump thrives on spectacle. His power is built on being seen, on commanding attention, on shaping narratives that place him at the center of every story. Abramovich, by contrast, mastered invisibility. His influence grows in silence, hidden in boardrooms and back channels where cameras never reach. One man needs the light to exist. The other survives only in the shadows. For a time, their ambitions aligned, each finding utility in the other. Trump could lean on Abramovich's resources, while Abramovich could use Trump's platform to extend his reach. But arrangements built on convenience rarely endure, because sooner or later, one man begins to feel that he is being used more than he is benefiting. This is the psychology of fragile alliances. They are not bound by loyalty nor by shared principle, but by what each side gains in the moment. And when that balance shifts, when one perceives betrayal or exploitation, the relationship collapses. For Trump, the revelation of Abramovich's secret deal was precisely that moment. It was the shattering of the illusion that he was the central figure, the kingmaker. To discover that Abramovich had moved without him, had brokered influence in a way that diminished his own importance, struck at the very core of his ego. That is why his reaction was so fierce. It was not just anger at a betrayal, it was fury at being reminded that he was not as indispensable as he believed. Philosophically, this speaks to a greater truth about human ambition. Ego is a force that thrives on affirmation. When it is fed, it expands. When it is threatened, it erupts. We often imagine the powerful as secure in their dominance, but in reality, the higher they climb, the more fragile they become. The fear of being replaced, of being overshadowed, grows with every step. And so, what looks like strength is often desperation disguised as confidence. This is why leaders lash out, why billionaires fight like cornered animals when their influence is questioned. Because beneath the surface lies a terror of becoming irrelevant. The clash between Trump and Abramovich is not simply a personal feud. It is a symbol of the instability that arises when power is pursued without principle. When relationships are transactional, they cannot weather storms. When alliances are built on ego, they cannot survive scrutiny. And when ambition becomes a contest of dominance, the result is always conflict, never peace. But within this chaos lies a lesson that stretches far beyond the men themselves. We must recognize that true strength does not come from domination or deception. It comes from integrity, from building structures of trust that cannot be shattered by betrayal. When we rely on ego to carry us, we are always at the mercy of those who can wound it. But when we ground ourselves in truth, no revelation, no exposure can take away what is real. And so, as we reflect on this clash of egos, let it remind us of a truth that applies to all of us. Power built on pride collapses, but power built on principle endures. The question is whether we will choose to build our lives, our systems, and our futures on the fragile foundation of ego, or on the unshakable ground of truth. What this entire story reveals: the secrecy of Abramovich, the explosive reaction of Trump, the hidden webs of power, and the inevitable clash of egos, is something much larger than two men and their dealings. It is a mirror held up to the world we live in. Because this scandal, as sensational as it may appear, is not an isolated drama. It is a symptom of a deeper condition that runs through the veins of politics, business, and society itself. The belief that power can be hoarded, concealed, and protected indefinitely. But history has always shown us the same truth. What is hidden will surface. What is built on deception will collapse. And what is fueled by ego will eventually consume itself. The lesson is not confined to Abramovich, his empire, or Trump's theatrics. It stretches into the systems that surround us, the institutions we are told to trust, the leaders we are told to follow. When secrecy and greed sit at the foundation, no structure can last. It may endure for a time, it may even dominate for a season, but the cracks always appear, and once they spread, the fall is unstoppable. Philosophically, this raises a profound question. Why do we, as societies, allow ourselves to be governed by shadows? Why do we tolerate systems that thrive on silence when we know that silence breeds corruption? Perhaps it is because secrecy offers comfort. It spares us from the discomfort of truth. To look behind the curtain is to see the machinery, the manipulation, the lies that sustain the show. And that can be overwhelming. But if we refuse to look, if we accept deception as the price of stability, then we become complicit in the very systems that rob us of our agency. There is a psychological depth to this as well. Human beings crave certainty. We want to believe that someone is in control, that the stage is set, that the game is being managed by hands more capable than ours. It is easier to trust the illusion than to confront the chaos. But illusions are dangerous. They disarm us, they lull us into passivity, and they convince us that our voices do not matter. The truth, however, is the opposite. It is precisely our refusal to question, our willingness to remain silent, that gives life to these hidden networks of power. That is the greater lesson in this scandal. The story is not about Trump or Abramovich alone. It is about us. It is about whether we choose to accept secrecy as the way of the world, or whether we demand transparency, accountability, and truth. Every corrupt empire depends on the silence of the many. Every hidden deal requires the blindness of the public, and every ego-driven collapse begins with the complicity of those who looked away. We must not look away. We must not surrender our right to ask questions, to demand answers, to challenge the shadows. For the moment we accept deception as normal, we guarantee that it will thrive. But when we shine light into those hidden corners, when we refuse to be silent, when we hold leaders accountable not for the images they project, but for the truths they conceal, that is when change begins. So let us not dismiss this story as just another scandal of the powerful. Let us see it for what it truly is. A reminder that truth, though delayed, is inevitable. And when it comes, it demands not only to be acknowledged, but to be acted upon. The choice before us is simple. Remain spectators in a world governed by shadows, or step into the light and insist that what is hidden must no longer remain hidden. For in the end, power survives only in darkness, but truth will always belong to the light.